Carrie, are you gay?
I am indeed, yes,
Carrie,
sir.
you're fired.
Hi, I'm Andy,
And I'm Roger,
and welcome to The Middle,
where we try to have thoughtful conversations
about awkward topics.
on our search to find the middle.
We're going to give you last week's news today. It's
It's a slogan we should put on a t-shirt.
Stop touching her!
I am tonight announcing my candidacy.
Taylor Swift. Look, my biggest issue with marriage is that I think that it's a fundamentally flawed institution that is built on the oppression of women.
I will not be lectured about sexism and misogyny.
Having truly rational conversations about controversial issues is risky these days.
Roger.
Andy, how you doing?
Yeah, not too bad. How about yourself?
Yeah, pretty good. It's Pride Month, actually, and I had an interesting conversation with a friend around your favorite uncle, Uncle Trump. So I wanted to play you this clip from The Apprentice.
I thought you were about to say Uncle Roger, but anyway.
No, a close second. I'm going to play you this clip from The Apprentice, and I want to kind of get your view on it.
Okay.
Are you a homosexual, Clay?
I am. Yes, Mr. Trump, I am.
No, is that true?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So you don't find Olive very attractive then?
No, I mean,
and
she's
you
a
don't find
beautiful
Felicia
woman.
very attractive?
They're beautiful women, but they're not my thing.
All right. That's why they have menus in restaurants, you know? I like steak, somebody else likes spaghetti. That's why they have menus in restaurants. It's a great world.
So the conversation that I had was this kind of thing around, is Trump intolerant of the LGBT community? What's your take on it?
Like, of all of the things that you want to go after Trump for, I think he historically has been less pernicious towards gay people than he has for all of the other causes that he's been disastrous for. But all of that said, to the extent that LGBTIQ, whatever the
Plus
extra the alphabet is, to the extent that that includes transgendered people, absolutely not. So he's utterly dredged that one up in quite a harsh and not homophobic, because that's not what the T is all about, but certainly transphobic sense. I think he's leaned on that as part of his political movement. And the other thing I would say is, whilst he might have kind of, it's not a group that he has any particular disdain for, as in, gay people, he's a classic boomer. I definitely can imagine him like putting his left foot in it or something, but it's not out of necessarily a place of hate or stirring up divisions.
I think that very few things start off positive to the LGBT community when they're followed up with, are you a homosexual? So I think he really turned that ship around, but I think it was good. I think that is a very endearing clip for Trump. And I think it actually shows in a lot of ways that, he's not ideological in this way. There's always a danger when you're such a divisive figure that you get tired with everything. And really, it's best to take it more issue by issue. But anyway, I thought that was funny for Pride Month to bring that up. And it was followed off the back with this other clip too that I'll just kind of put in here.
Carrie, are you gay?
I am indeed, yes,
Carrie,
sir.
you're fired.
So that was a black gay contestant on The Apprentice. So I'm not sure which one came first in the chronology.
Wait, that wasn't just like a mishmash of like a cut to make him look bad. That was
pretty sure
that happened exactly like that.
Well, I mean,
are you gay? Yes,
you're fired.
You're fired. Is that what happened?
Look, I can't
that.
verify, but it didn't look like a jump cut. But I'm here for it, even if it was.
All right. So today we're going to touch on, I don't know kind of how to like thread it all together, but it's kind of like the concept of changing your mind, right? Or acknowledging that you've been wrong in the past and being open to being wrong in the future. Like having a malleable mind that doesn't like dig in or doesn't get kind of entrenched in positions because, the fact that you hold them forms part of your identity or something that you can't change. So we're going to focus on like past, present, and future. We're going to take a bit of a tour of some of the things that where we've changed our views in the past. Then we're going to turn to what we wish we could change of each other's views in the present. And then we're going to cast our minds to the future and think about what views we currently hold that we could possibly foresee as changing?
Well, I think we're going to start with things that we believe we've changed our mind on already. So I think the most fundamental one for me, I suppose, which kicked off all the rest of the dominoes, would be religion. So that's my first one, and that would be kind of growing up in the faith, in the Christian faith, and then moving away. And then the second one would be for me this long-held view that overly positive people are fake and insincere. So those are my two.
Oh, I'm surprised you've changed your mind of that one. All right. Well, I'll give my two. So I'm going to throw a general one out around, kind of being black and white around, there's if people haven't succeeded, then it's their own fault. Acknowledging that different people have different levels of privilege, and some people have a head start and some people have to run a longer race, sort of things. And then the second one is around parenting, where I would say, I think initially as a parent, I was probably, I would say to some extent, a little bit naive, very sort of a view oh yeah, we don't need to be hard on kids. You can give them a little bit more freedom. You don't need to be so strict and all those sorts of things. And I think as I've sort of been through the journey, I think I've definitely kind of appreciated and value a more tighter, sort of more boundaries and kind of a step, because I guess just being a bit tougher, because the real world has those things, right? The real world is strict. If you have a job, you've got to show up to work. Well, actually, that's not that's always true. But you know what I mean? You've got to. The real world is strict, and if you don't follow the rules of the real world, you're going to struggle. So I think being a good parent, does require you to be a lot more tight about preparing your kid through those boundaries. I've flipped there. So in the sense that I've now kind of. Yeah, I now have a respect for that I probably didn't have earlier on as a parent. Yeah,
that's interesting, Jenny. I mean, just on the parenting one, I'm in a constant battle of what is the right balance, right? And what feels right for you as a parent. And then that kind of dreaded feeling of, are you missing a beat? Especially from my upbringing, which was of such a different style, right? And a lot of ethnic people, when they grow up and they become a bit more westernized, it kind of feels like you're missing the secret sauce a little bit, or you're worried that you're missing the secret sauce, that actually you don't want to pass on any trauma or the kind of slightly less or more out of fashion elements of your upbringing, but you do kind of wonder whether that adversity created some of your success. And I think that's the really hard thing, how the dosage makes the poison, right? And you're worried sometimes by trying to avoid all the poison that you're making yourself weaker. And that's the hard thing to know, right? And I think at the end of the day, you'll never know, and you can only do what you can do, right? It's like the best diet is the one that you can keep on doing.
I think the other thing with parenting is every kid is so different, right? What always used to ship me off whenever you get advice from other parents, unsolicited usually, and it's well, that worked for your kid, but we're talking about a completely idiosyncratic human being here.
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily going to follow. And that's true with the whole boundaries thing. Some kids could do with a lot more boundaries than others.
Well, they self-regulate.
Yeah. Exactly. But the key thing with boundaries is once you've lost a boundary, it's gone forever. So it's sort of I think maybe being a bit more risk averse about don't give the boundary away until you're confident that the boundary is not required, right? I do wonder, when you have kids that misbehave, is that a lack of boundaries, or is it just there are some kids that just misbehave? And there's a whole bunch of reasons for that.
Mate, I think that you're so right with the whole kids are different, right? Because I see that a lot. I see that a lot with my friends, my family friends, and this is what I mean about what you can physically do as a parent. I see a dynamic where the parents have a parenting style, right? And they don't really change that style depending on the kid. It's no, I'm the parent, this is the style, and I'm going to parent each kid the same way, right? Each of my kids the same way, and you see very, very different results. And it's a reflection from my mind is that actually micro-adapting to each kid and fundamentally making big changes to your style, parenting style for each kid is kind of impossible.
Yeah. All right. Talk me through insincere people.
Okay, this one was the more like lighter-hearted one, right? And I think that I've always seen myself as like not cynical, but I'm very suspicious of overly positive people, right? Like the Cheshire cat smiling back at you. Because to me, I think it may be just from a culture perspective, I kind of prize that authenticity, right? And so it makes me suspicious around that there's a mask on, right? And so I used to have this long-held view that, you know, if you are someone who just lays it on thick or is going for this cheap kind of social engagement, you know, like the people that you feel they're behaving like they've just read the Carnegie How to Win Friends and Influence People, right? Like they're doing all the tricks in the book to try to have this outward connection and leave people warm, but it's a very hollow thing where you don't actually feel like you know them at all, right? And I kind of used to think that for a long time, or people I met in my colleagues that I met, or just acquaintances and things like that. You know, it started to form this view for me that it's like that's like they're not my people, and I'd rather the warts and all version of it, right? I'd rather to get to the heart of someone, and I think that in a way, like that was coming from a place of maybe childish arrogance, where you kind of are prizing certain things over others. And I think a real turning point was having some people in my life that made me kind of respect someone who is genuinely positive, or they are changing their surroundings and the people they meet for the better, right? And it was very hard to accept. It came from a few key people very close to me that I admired and respected for me to get there. And it started to rub off on me a little bit as well. While you don't want to go down this whole fake, everyone's wearing a mask and they're not, they're dying on the inside and so on. But I think that there is genuinely a space for positive people in the world, and that if it's done in the right way and you can kind of break you out of that cynical nature, it can kind of warm up a community.
But don't you think that the principle is still true? It's just that maybe you're applying the principle in the wrong places. So anyone who's been to the United States should know that when they go to the diner and their server lays it on thick and they're super polite, they're doing it because they want a tip, So at that most extreme end of the spectrum, it should be clear. Or it's like when you go to a hairdresser, and a hairdresser, you have all this mindless chit-chat. Well, for some of us, it's mindless chit-chat, right? It does come across as a little bit like fake. It's like commercial. It's not authentic, right? So I suppose the principle, I think, is still right. It's just that you can say that, look, genuinely, there are some good people who that's just their,
yeah.
Then maybe you're mischaracterizing them in that way when they're actually not that person.
Yeah, I don't think it's look, there's a level one of naivete that would say, yes, I think that I think the stripper's in love with me because they're being so nice to me and they're complimenting me, right? So I don't think that that's the main challenge when it comes to these people.
No, but just to be clear, I don't think the most pernicious part is the hairdresser or the server in the low-paid server in the diner in America. But then you just get more complicated or more complex variants of the same thing, right? So you might get a person who, let's say someone who's in corporate sales, like they've got a sales job in a corporate environment and they might be, trying to secure hundreds of thousands of dollars of work or even millions of dollars of work. And they're just this outgoing sort of person, but people who work in those jobs generally are, maybe they have this thing where people want to be around them, right? But then they're exploiting that, right? They're selling that.
Yeah.
And it's not real, and there's lots of people, there's a ton of people who their whole life is just building networks, right? Because their networks are there, that's their currency that's an asset.
I guess why I've changed my
right?
mind, I agree with all the things you're saying, right? But I guess where I've changed my mind is seeing it as a universally negative thing, right? The behavior in itself, right? Now, when you add in a lot of layers of manipulation for some goal that perhaps is not in your best interest, that's its own thing. that should be called out, and that's how you get toxic kind of manipulation. But I think just in general, someone being polite. So I'll give you an example. So you're having a bad day, right? Like you kind of left the house, you're having a bad day, you're just grumpy, right? And you have this random interaction with, say, your barista or someone on public transport. Now, if you were your authentic self, you might let some of your negative feelings spill out on this person. You might even abuse them. You might just be you might be cold. Yeah, like for sure.
That coffee was shit this morning. What were you thinking?
No, I mean, like, okay, if you're in a grumpy mood and your barista kind of like gets your order wrong or does something, you're more likely to give it to them, right? Or give them some kind of negative emotion that makes them feel.
I just take the lid off and like spit and just like throw it in their face.
And that's how it works. That's human nature. But if you can find a way, if you can kind of have this understanding, this social contract of say, hey, look, I'm accountable for my actions. I could actually make someone's day by toning down my inner bullshit, right? Like I could actually put some good energy into the world. And I guess that's what I mean about changing my view. Like even if that's fake, right? Or maybe the framing is fundamentally wrong. It's not fake. It's actually taking accountability for your impacts, how you impact the people around you. If we wanted to tomorrow, right, you and I could find some people, and you'd find a lot of people, say, in your office or just acquaintances, and you could give them a heartfelt compliment very, very easily. You could find something that they're good at or whatever, and you could literally change the next 24 hours for that person. Why don't you, right?
That kind of stuff you're talking about for me is not within the scope of how I see this problem, right? So I don't have a problem with people just being polite. Like politeness is and civility is, it's kind of what makes the world work, right? And it's not to go mental. And to your point, why don't we just go and give random comments? And I think actually the reason we don't is because it risks undermining the very comment itself. If you're every day commenting how great everybody is, and that gets to the part where it starts to attack the authenticity and how meaningful the actual compliment is.
I don't think some people ever do it though. It's not like it's like you kind of around.
I know.
I just think I'll dub myself in. I don't go through the world thinking.
Yeah, I know, but like if you're talking about like fake people, right? Fake people who go over the top with stuff like that can be insincere because they don't actually mean it, right? They say it because it drives them a benefit. All right, so your other one was religion. So I think we could get down a rabbit warren here. So
yeah,
we might get the shortcut version. But maybe just to ask you one question, is there any part, like, are you completely like devoid of your religious values, or are you a little bit more like in the Jordan Peterson sort of I act as if God exists sort of world?
No, so I think that it's probably more like that Dawkins thing where if you had to describe it semantically, it would be, you're agnostic, right? But for all intents and purposes, it's the same as being an atheist, right?
Well, I don't mean do you believe in God. I'm not asking like do you believe in, fairies at the bottom of the garden. I'm asking more like the values, right? Do you feel like, because that's, when Jordan Peterson says that line, I act as if God exists, what he's actually saying is that it's immaterial whether he actually believes in a supernatural being. Like the fact is that most of us do act as if God exists.
I think
because culturally.
It's a very loaded question because you can fulfill your contract of living inside, in quotation, Christian values by living in and following the laws of most Western nations.
But that's my point, right?
So it's kind of a meaningless statement because if you take that closer to the bone, and if Jordan Peterson is living as if God exists, then there are some fundamental things and behaviors that God wants from you, right? And it is a submission to.
But I guess what I'm trying to say is that you grew up this way, right? And this had a very influential impact on your life during your formative years. So do you still act the same way as you did? Like, so what was the net impact of your losing the faith? Did it impact and change your behaviors?
Look, I think it starts in the grey, right? So I think people who are not religious or have never been religious in an organized religion sense underestimate how much of a impact it is when you step out, because it does impact absolutely everything. Now, you can post-rationalize a lot of things, around why people act in ethical ways or have, in quotation, Christian values, even though they're not religious. But that's very, very different from being indoctrinated into a faith that tells you the reason you behave this way is because of your religious values. It's like pulling out all the foundational Jenga pieces, right? And then you have to go on this mental process of re-examining things because you've been living a lie.
But what does that mean in practice, though? Like, people don't tend to, lose their faith and then start murdering babies, right? So what does that mean? Like, was there, were there things that you didn't do that you started doing? Like, give me actual practical
Yeah. I mean,
stuff.
There was a part where the domino fell around this kind of like idea of Christian values around family that started to come under question. And for a while it was, well, like, does marriage actually mean anything? Does actually like kinship mean anything? Is it actually advisable to go down that path when you can see how heavily manipulated it has been from something like Christianity? There are ethical things too. Does it actually really matter if you sin when it's inside the law or perhaps within a grey area of the law?
Well, you can't sin if you don't believe in God.
But we talked about behaviors, right? So it's a free-for-all. All the things that you thought had meaning in life are now, like, you've got to start again, right? And then where it ended up for me is more kind of being in that kind of existentialist family that life has no meaning other than the meaning that you allocate to it. And that's like the key change, right? It changes everything in that respect, right? There is no rules. We're just animals on a spinning rock, right? And it brings you into this real sense of like this idea and my view on, conscious thought and all this kind of stuff, that actually a lot of this stuff is manufactured and it doesn't really matter. And it brings you kind of go through this wave into nihilism, and then you come back up into something more manageable.
I guess my skepticism somewhat is that, like, a lot of that stuff's like an interesting intellectual journey to go through, right? A philosophical journey. But like generally people don't, like, it's like the classic concept of like Catholic guilt, right? And it's interesting because like I grew up in a household where, how to put it, sort of, I think we should be Catholic, but I'm not really fully 100% on board with this thing. But the whole, like, Catholic guilt is like, it's like a real thing. Like, it permeates through, like, I would say I still got Catholic guilt, like, because it's a cultural thing. It permeates into culture. So I guess what I'm trying to say, like, long story short, I don't think you can shake some of those foundational things. Like, I think you can have the intellectual, philosophical kind of contemplation of it, but you don't start.
Well, it's a form of trauma, like what you're feeling, what you're describing, right? And it is, Catholic guilt is a good way to sum it up, but every religion has it, right? Like the Christian religion tells you that there is an almighty, your creator, your father is watching you at all times. They're watching you when you do your best. They're watching you when you have bad thoughts, when you sin, all this kind of stuff. And all these things are being tallied up, and you will burn in hell if you don't get this right. There is a significant trauma with that's based around guilt and shame and all this kind of stuff, right? And that takes a long time to shake off, right? And there's a piece of code in my mind that has this whole antitrust thing, and that's why this has influenced me around always being one of those people who always want the truth, no matter how inconvenient that truth may be.
All right, shall we move on to 10 things I wish I could change about you?
Maybe not 10. All right.
So I think both of mine may have a degree of, there might be second cousins or something. But the first is, I definitely got to throw Trump into the mix. And, just for our listeners, I think we should be clear about that we're neither of us, well, I'll let you speak for yourself, but I'm definitely not a Trump supporter, but I don't think you are either. But I think you're definitely far closer, like if there's a spectrum of like love and hate for Trump, we're still quite far apart. So I think you see things in Trump that I think aren't actually things to be valuing, or even they're not even there to begin with.
Yeah.
And I think there's things that I utterly despise about Trump that you don't see as things to necessarily care about. So I think that's kind of the first one. And I should say, like, I'd love you to like hate Trump more than me, because then like I could play like devil's advocate for Trump, like, because I think that would be kind of fun in a conversation. Like, I think it would be fun to be able to like give him the most generous like just to have just for the sport of it. So even just at that level, like, yeah, I'd love to have a conversation where I'm defending Trump from you. But anyway, I don't
we can see how well you got that.
That's my first one. And as I said, I think they're maybe second cousins, but they're still quite distinct. And the second is like I don't think you have. I think your trust for institutions is not very high. Like, I think you have, well, certainly compared to me, right? So I think you're a lot more, I don't want to say conspiracy theorist or conspiracy oriented thinking. Like, I don't think that, I wouldn't give you that charge, but I think you don't take like expert opinion at face value, for example. I think, like, in a lot of areas, maybe not every area, but at least in some areas, and I think that relates to a few things. One, it's to do with like trust for, who are the experts and how do they become the experts, and can we continue to trust them as experts and their views? And, you could throw in like some of our conversations on COVID as part of that. Certainly with Trump in terms of, kind of respecting some of the existing architecture of government, because it actually serves a purpose. So just that general space. So I think that's something that, that would be my second one.
Yeah, look, that all makes sense. And let's have a chat about that. On my side, I've gone a bit of one is very similar, and I think it's kind of it's very predictable in terms of coming off the back of what you've said, and that is to be more open to things and from like that antitrust in establishments, right? So I think that, and we pretty much that'll play out in the conversation that we have, but I do think that sometimes you can be very locked into what I see as like an elitist opinion on certain institutions or established institutions that I think that, you don't let in the lines of thinking because of the stamp of expertise or elite expertise, right? So that is absolutely, the other side of the coin of what you've said. The other one that I had is just more general. Like, actually, I think what I wish I could change about you is to have more kids. Because I just for a multitude of reasons, the older I get, the more I see that anything that is worth doing in a cosmic scale is based more on children.
I mean, I knew you were a tech bro Elon Musk fanboy, but I didn't realize that would permeate into.
Anyway, we'll get to that because obviously that one's personal. But I think we should dive into the Trump stuff. So let me clarify a few things about Trump. And I think that it would be fair to say that we are both on the middle. We did a huge arc on the US election, and we didn't even want to. We kind of fell into it, and slowly by slowly, we got into the hot tub. And I think we followed a bit of a trajectory there where, again, I left a little bit of space to see some of the elements, what I see as the positive elements of a figure like Trump in US politics, while I believe still condemning some of the issues that I saw, but more for me wanting to use it as a tool to understand the American people and the American condition and the body politic. So to clarify, I'm not a Trump supporter. Maybe a Trump sympathizer, or like, I don't like that word because it kind of reminds me of Nazi sympathizer, but but I think that I'm more open to seeing like him as a point in time tool with certain kind of functions, right? And alongside with that, other issues. So I'm not someone who has been repulsed by him to the point where things are beyond the pale. And I think that is to your second point. It's because I don't have as much respect for institutions and the head of those institutions in the same way other people do. Like, they look at great leaders or what they see as great leaders and they give them their respect. And that's why they're so offended and shocked when they see a figure like Trump. But I don't have that, right? Like, what's a God to a non-believer? I don't look at Obama and think that he is some exalted leader that has all this class and different things. I don't see that. It's quite the opposite for me. I don't see that for Bill Clinton. You know, I don't see it. To me, it's incredulous that this is the dude that stuck a cigar up intern's vagina, you know, in the White House. Trump's never done anything like that in the White House yet, but there's still time.
Well, you don't know what Trump's done.
That's true. That's true. But I mean, do you know what I mean? Like, so to me, I kind of see a little bit of like a false dichotomy in some of this stuff. And it's because of that antitrust, right?
Well, I think at the risk of like replaying the whole Trump debate, I don't think that's the issue. Like, I think as in like the reason people don't like Trump, I don't think is because he's a bit uncouth, you know? Like, I don't think it's because...
So that's not your reason, Andy. And I understand
but I
your
don't
reason,
think that...
But a huge part of it is that.
I think there's lots of reasons not to like Trump. I agree with that. But like people who follow, you know, politics, both in America but even internationally, like they're not coming at it from an elitist perspective. They're coming at it from the perspective of, okay, like, is this guy's just destroyed the transatlantic alliance? That's actually a problem. This guy has just said Ukraine started the war and that Zelensky is a dictator. That's kind of a problem. He's just announced that he's going to turn Gaza into the Riviera of the Middle East. That's kind of a problem.
Don't you like the Riviera?
Well, but the point is not that he's a bit awkward. The problem is the things he's doing and his lack of experience, his bad judgment. Like, that's what people are actually concerned about, right? You know, and part of the feature of that arc of the conversation we had for me was that, like, I'm very happy to have the conversation to understand Trump as like let's be a man from Mars, you know, and observe him dispassionately and why he's popular. Like, let's analyze that. Like, that's fine. You can totally do that. But you can understand the man while also acknowledging just how bad he is for the country and for the world. Like, and I think the thread of the arc was that if you can have that conversation about his redeeming qualities once you're confident you're on the same page with someone about, yes, okay, we always accept that the things that I think he's utterly like pernicious for, we are all on the same page about that. And I don't think we ever truly got there.
But respectfully, I think that's too unbalanced for me, right? Like, because what you're kind of saying is that once we agree on the outcome, like the kind of the headline, then we can go in and have the academic argument. From a principle perspective, what I was saying is that this whole project is a test of, can you take these two diametrically opposed sides and have the conversation, right? Because you have to understand that this is the state of America, right? Like, and this is where people are at, and then you need to be able to sit on the other side of the aisle and talk to people and hold space to have these fundamental disagreements, but still talk about issues.
Like, there are probably some people out there who would not ever concede that there's any conversation to be had about whether immigration needs to be better controlled in the United States, right? That's the wrong approach. But I don't think that's the approach. It's not how I would come at it. I think you can have that conversation. But if you, in a conversation about Trump, can't both come to the conclusion that he's utterly unfit for office, like, not just a little bit unfit, but utterly unfit for office, then there's too much other stuff that needs to be reconciled before you can move forward, right? For me, because for me, he is utterly unfit for office. I think he's proven himself to be utterly unfit for office. And I think by the end of 4 years, we're going to look back and we're going to go, what the fuck was that, you know? And I think, unfortunately, like, in this first, I don't know how many weeks he's been in office for, like, I think it's been worse than what I would have expected it to be. So unless you're a single issue sort of, you're only talking about it with so many boundaries of the conversation where you're just saying, well, if all you care about is Israel, for example, and that's the only thing you care about in this whole world, and you're a single issue, like you're Ben Shapiro, sort of, we've had the conversation whether that's why he supports him. You know, unless you do something like that and you narrow the conversation, I don't think it's possible to give this guy any credit whatsoever, right, even
let's get to
offsetting all the bad
let's
stuff.
Get to the heart, though. Like, so you're talking about you wish you could change my mind. Let's get really specific with the statement on specifically what around Trump.
if I got the vibe from you, like, and it's a vibe thing, that you didn't have sympathies for Trump, then that would probably satisfy me. Like, we can have like the, good chat about, the Democrats are shit, they're into all this stuff that the mainstream Americans don't care about. And what they actually care about is all this stuff. Trump's like picked up all the dollar bills laying on the ground because no one else has picked them up. And he's swept all these voters who care about these like bread and butter issues. And he's a great showman. He's a great communicator, even if he looks a bit, he sounds awkward to elites, but he actually is a good communicator to me. Like, we could talk about all that stuff, right? But like, even the conversation we had the other week about like Elon Musk, like it's like, come on, like, can't you just say, yeah, man, this is fucked. This situation is totally fucked. However, there's this part about governments that is inefficient, and even though Elon Musk is fucked, Doge is totally fucked. Like, there probably still should be a process, and you can talk about that, and I'll be fine with that. But like, it's the essence of a sympathy for the MAGA movement that gets me, because I've got that sense from
but that's exactly what I'm talking about. This is what the left demands. It's like, I need you to bend the knee and say that Trump is beyond the pale, overwhelmingly a bad thing, and he's vile.
You don't need
he's
to say it.
disgusting.
I need to actually understand. Like, it's not that you need to say it or do something. It's just like, for me, it's a suspicious conversation. Like, it's like,
well,
like, it's not. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, I can't.
But
I can't. Like, we're not.
This is the problem, though, Andy. Right? Like, at the end of 4 years, if Trump is universally shit panned, right? Like, it's now unequivocal. There is no room for any kind of business that he's burnt this thing to the ground. You'll want to say to me, "I told you so," and I will have no attachment to it. And I think that's the problem with this piece, right? Like, what you are wanting from me isn't how I feel about, like, it doesn't relate to my support for Trump.
Let me give it a completely different analogy. Maybe you get one of those door knockers, right? They knock on your door, right? And they say nothing about religion. They just have a nice conversation with you. You're in the back of your mind, you're like, I'm ready for them. I'm just waiting for them to like get in, that they're trying to like get you to come to their Bible course or whatever, right? But they don't lead with that because they know that people react like, again. So you're very suspicious about the conversation. And that's kind of how I feel about it, because it's like, I want to flush out.
Yeah, the point of support.
Like, it feels like you're playing devil's advocate.
Yeah, I mean, in some parts, you're leaving me no choice. If I'm being honest with you, Andy, like I go back to one of our very, very first.
Yeah, but it's called devil's advocate for a reason.
I'll go back to one of my very, very first.
So can't we just call a devil a devil? Like, why do we need to? Of course, he's a devil, but yeah, I'm leaving you with no choice. So what? Like,
I want to go back to our very first conversation about it, right? And because I haven't changed my views on it, right? And maybe you're reacting to some of the more kind of probing or prodding. But I said Trump's unfit for office in that very first conversation about it. I said that, but I also said that sometimes I can see the value of having a thug at the negotiating table. Just
generally, like, your inference that he's somehow a good negotiator from this is utter like fiction. This is fantasy. This is made up. You have to be giving him some kind of like benefit of the doubt that is so extreme, and bearing in mind that like there've probably been lots of very focused negotiators working on this stuff for a long, long time who work through like the game theory of all of this stuff. And then you have a guy who comes in and says, "Oh, well, I forget all of that. I'm just going to just do this random thing like that."
See, I mean, maybe that's the difference between us getting to the next point, Andy. Like, you believe that there's these big brains behind the scenes doing these things, right? Like playing the game theory, doing it. And there was a very, 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 very good reason why Biden couldn't move on all this stuff.
It's a bit like, Qantas is running low on pilots, so we can't, we don't really want to cancel our flight, so we'll just let like the Cessna pilot fly the A380.
I don't believe that Biden had any answers in this respect. And that's probably the difference between us. Like, you believe that there's some big brain game theorist behind it. And I don't see that.
Well, they have thousands of people working on this, thousands of analysts working on this. Like, this isn't Biden. This isn't Biden's answer. Biden isn't the man to have an answer. Biden's the man to get like a detailed briefing pack from all of the most considered expertise in the room, and to say, yeah, I accept that recommendation, or no, I don't accept that recommendation, or actually I prefer option B. Like this notion of like, oh, Biden didn't have of course he didn't have an answer. He's a fucking 80-year-old man, senile. Like the administration are the people who have, you know, and don't forget there's other players as well. I mean, this is a very US centric sort of way of thinking about it, that every problem on the planet somehow, you know, forgetting Europe, forgetting Ukraine itself, like this is, you know, this is just, yeah, it's not on.
I want to go to the second part, right? Because I think a lot of it's stemming from that second point of, you'd wish I had more trust in institutions, or the elite nature of institutions.
Well, it's not the elite nature. That's not the part that
the expert nature of it. Like you believe that there is expertise that should override.
It's the wisdom of, I would say it's the wisdom of the crowds, but it's the wisdom of like to trust in people who, and like I'm not saying this to be disparaging, but like to have trust in people who've given more thought to this than simply, you know, a 1 hour a week podcast. You know what I mean? Like it's respecting that those people have more capacity to weigh up complex situations and will, on average, make a better call, right? And actually, like a good analyst will also call out uncertainty and acknowledge uncertainty, but they'll at least have to grapple with that, right? Whereas the actually what's pernicious is thinking you can have certainty, and I think that's Trump's like failing to think that you somehow have the answer when you don't, and that's the
reason I feel the way I feel about institutions is that I have spent a lot of time inside industry and corporations and things like that from all different angles, from all different kind of parts of components of an organization. And what I see in there is a complete breakdown of applied purpose. And I don't believe that something like the government is any better. And in fact, I know it's probably a lot worse at navigating these things. And so, you know, like, why do you think most projects over a year fail?
Can I don't want to answer that question. I want to go back to what you just said. You said you've spent your whole career in the private sector in organizations where you've encountered,
and small business organizations too.
And you've encountered, you know, like failings or whatever, right? But then you said, oh, you think government's worse. Like, that is so far from the truth. Like, the people advising within government on their areas of subject matter expertise are incredibly competent people who are very intelligent. They are very well considered. They are very extremely thoughtful, and they provide good advice. So I think you're on a total misapprehension about how it works. And the call out that you said, and you think government's worse, to me, that's a signal of, like, for me, where the bias is, right?
Yeah, but
I think you're projecting.
If you answer my question of why projects fail, it's not because.
But we're not talking about projects. We're talking about advice.
Projects failures are not because the solution is fundamentally unsound, or like you said, that there are people that have expertise giving sound advice. That advice needs to be implemented in the real world.
We're not talking about building a bridge here. We're talking, except for Trump in Gaza. But what we're talking about.
I'm talking about real change.
All right. Can we ground this to, like, let's talk like diplomatic situation, right? So the amount of preparation that goes into, like, a meeting between, like, let's say 2 leaders of a country is immense, right? Just work through this for a moment, right? You have probably, I'm just going to say randomly, like 100 people who will have very deep subject matter expertise in a very narrow field as it applies to that meeting, right? So they might be talking about, like, say, financial sector policy. Oh, we're going to have this new change in policy between our 2 countries to allow this thing to happen, right? So you'll have like 100 people who have that very deep expertise in their specific area contributing to, like, briefing materials, advice to not the actual leader, but the staff that supports the leader for this meeting that's about to happen. So you have, like, this whole ecosystem of advice going up on every aspect of that meeting, right? then what you have is you have the intelligence communities doing all of their work to understand all of the like under the table stuff, to understand like, okay, well, who's he been talking to? What could that mean? Like, what's the like the nature of like, what could that mean? Are they like going to screw us over with this conversation? So you have this, like, you could not imagine how much, and that's why when people talk about wasting government, it's because that's the kind of shit they're doing, right? But the thing is, the consequences of that meeting are huge, right? It could be like Australia's going to be exempt from aluminium and steel tariffs, right? So, which is billions and billions of dollars, right? So it's justified. And so when you're part of that ecosystem, and then you go into a world where someone tells you, oh no, like the leader's not listening to any of this stuff. He's not actually getting across it. He's just going to see if he likes the leader. And if they have a good golf match, then, maybe we'll get a good outcome or something. Like, that's not how it should work. The way it should work is like you have professional leaders acting professionally. And, and then you come in with this disparaging kind of comment, like dissing on all of that stuff. Like, it's a different craft. It's like, I would just make one point to you, is that this world of like advice is not the same as what you're exposed to. You're exposed to something completely different. It's a completely different beast, and your experience with that does not translate at all to this world that's actually very professional and very high quality. Like, I've not met, like, in my career, people who are as impressive as those I've worked with in government.
But Andy, again, I'm not disputing the fact that there's expertise and there's sound people trying to do the right thing. Delivery or implementation of something, or putting it into the real world.
We're not talking about delivery and implementation here. We're talking about advice.
Well, I mean, that's just one aspect of it, though, right? Like, government is providing services and all these things to people.
But
right?
we're talking about it. That's different. Like, that's why we privatize. Like government. That's why, like,
they can't do it.
Like, I'm a small government guy, right? Of course, government shouldn't be working in the market. Like, of course, we shouldn't have like a nationalized airline. We shouldn't have, Australia. Yeah, of course, we should leave all of that stuff to the private sector. Of course, like, I agree with that. But the function of government, the business of government, is not the business of the private sector. It's a different beast, and I think you miss that. I think you see the government doing things which possibly could be done in the private sector, and I think you see them doing those things badly, and you think, oh, well, government's shit then, right? But then the actual part of government that's like, that actually has to be done by government, and when I say government, I mean the institutions of government, and whether we're talking about like the Department of Health providing advice on health policy, for example, like, that's policy advice, right? And I think you see one thing and you translate it and you project it onto another, and I think that's a blind spot for you.
Yeah, look, I mean, I'll take that on board. That what I'm talking about when I say government's worse, I'm talking about the inefficiency of general operations and implementing change.
Remember, I'm a small government guy, so government should not be doing like operational things generally. So, like, and government will generally be inefficient at sort of operational things.
Isn't that the vast majority of the expenditure?
But can we just backtrack a little bit? What we're talking about is professional advice, right? Trust in institutions, right? And so for me, that's a bait and switch, right? You're saying, well, government's generally inefficient, therefore they can't do this other thing. It's like it's like a bait and switch. We're
talking about what the government is and like the institutions. Like, it's stemming from this. And look, I get it. Like, you said something in the previous episode about it's insulting to the craft of government, right? To say this, but I'm talking about, I guess what I'm trying to say to you is that from academic expertise and all that kind of achievement, there's a long road to affecting change in society, right? And like, the two things are linked in a lot of ways, right? I'm not trying to argue. I'm conceding your point on the whole thing about advice and policy and all that, but things have to get done, And like, it's like I said, it's not privatized.
Well, often a lot of it is. I mean, there's very few parts of the economy where the government conducts a service that does not relate, like, that only government can do. So I wouldn't be unsympathetic to the view that public hospitals are incredibly inefficient. I also wouldn't be unsympathetic to the view that schools are very, inefficient. But at the same time, there's other values that the community does want, like these services delivered by the public. But when it comes to, say, public infrastructure, pretty much all public infrastructure is delivered by the private sector. So there's very few areas of government that are not pretty much outsourced wherever they can and delivered by, you're right, including project management, not just we'll get a few private sector building firms to do
Have a
it.
discussion on the NBN.
Yeah, but even the NBN was private sector delivered. But I think it's a bait and switch to look at, say, the Sydney Rail network and go, well, that's obviously not a shining light of efficiency. But then to go, but that means like Donald Trump's great.
No, but you're saying that, not me. Come on. That, like, this was meant to be the second point that was away from Trump.
Well, okay, but like, I mean, in terms of institutions, I mean, because we got off on there because it's like, you're like, well, sometimes these people, you shouldn't listen to them. You should just go with like, maybe some unorthodox view because that's good. But like the kind of people I'm thinking of are like people who would dedicate their whole careers to this stuff. Like the kind of people who would work at DFAT, right? These are very bright people, right? And you could not get... honestly, not every government department, but there's like in the space that we're talking about, like whether it's health, like so we're talking about like during COVID-19, like the people advising on health policy at that time, whether we're talking about international relations and people at DFAT, whether we're talking about economic policy, people in like say Treasury or the RBA, whether we're talking about these very, very niche specific areas, you will probably struggle to find more competent and effective and capable organizations in the country, full stop, across the whole public and private sectors. These are incredibly high-quality, world-class institutions. And I think if your starting point is that we shouldn't trust them, because they might get some things wrong from time to time, which they do, that's a flaw, because these are really high-quality institutions.
Okay. You need to kind of have a think about how you're threading this one, Andy, right? Like I've said that there's inefficiency in organizations and in government culture. There is as well. And I believe worse. I've acknowledged your thing around expertise, but that is not the same thing as the running of an organization, the implementation of change and services. And for that reason, it's not an end of discussion for me when I hear some kind of like announcement on a position. It's like that's all I'm saying. Like I don't kind of shut the door and go, hey, look, obviously this climate guy knows more than me because he's a scientist and he spent his whole life. It's like, no, every place should be open to some level of scrutiny, some level of prodding, and it doesn't mean that you believe a counterpoint to everything, right? And I don't. But I believe I have a healthy mistrust of the system.
But one of the things that makes these institutions so credible and so reliable, and when I say reliable, I want to be clear, like that doesn't mean they get things right all the time. I just mean that they're reliably the best places to trust what they're saying, right? So as in there's no other alternative source of information that actually might be better, right?
Well, I mean, I've got Rogan, right? So you pinned me up for COVID, right? You pinned me up for COVID.
You've said like institutions shouldn't be like free from scrutiny. One of the things that makes these institutions so high quality is they have a culture of exactly what you've just said, where every opinion held. Okay, so you go through a few processes. You go internally. So internally, they have these places are famous for having a really hard, aggressive culture internally of debate. So where you have different people, different ideas, and they get challenged, and it's actually can be quite an off-putting place to be, because you have people who don't find that very comfortable because their views are challenged, and so they have that internally. So that's part of their culture internally. And so this is what annoys me when you compare these places to like some shitty backwater trying to deliver some services anyway, deliver milk on time. But
who's diminishing now?
But they have high quality culture of internal debate. But then externally as well, they're subject to so much scrutiny. Like they have to go through. I mean, they have to appear before Parliament. Like they have to get grilled by government and opposition and crossbench about everything that they've done. Like, I mean,
not everyone. I'm agreeing with all your points, Andy, but not everyone. Like, if I were to believe your characterization, the government is 95% filled with world-class economists and scientists and biologists and all this kind of stuff, and that's just not true. And the rest is filled with a bunch of long-term employees on defined benefits that have a different incentive market, and that's what I'm responding to as well. And that's why I said majority of the expenditure is based on these services. They're not on this highfalutin kind of things that you're talking about.
Yeah, but I think we're cross purposes here because you've got to distinguish between delivery agencies and policy agencies. So I'm not here to defend the delivery agencies or the people involved in, like at no point have I ever said, I think, Roger, you should respect, the hospital system as the shining light of efficiency. I've never said that.
Well, this COVID thing.
Well, this is where you're misunderstanding how it works, right? The hospital system is not connected to the part of government that delivers medical advice in the hospital system,
doesn't it?
The efficiencies you see in the hospital system, it's a bait and switch.
Yeah, it's a bait and switch.
Right?
I don't hold the hose, mate. That's what this is.
So I'm hearing from you a focus on operational efficiency, which I don't have any horse in that race. Okay, operational efficiency. I have a view that like Elon Musk's approach is not very good, but that doesn't mean that I disagree with the notion that there's efficiency gains you can yield out of government. Of course, like I'm not that's I've never had that position, right? But what we're talking about here is like institutions that deliver advice and deliver.
And that's what you're.
So
okay, let's circuit break it, because what I was talking about is the implementation of change, which is the operational. You've carved out that compared to policy and advice, right? Which I agree. I agree with what you're saying. I was saying the comments about, the entirety of a government organization. Okay.
Yeah, but you can well say, oh yeah, I agree with that. But I guess my whole point is that I don't necessarily see it, right? Like I see you very skeptical sometimes. And I can tell you those people who look at this stuff across the whole different apparatus of government, both, not just obviously Australia, but like whether they're working in America, whether they're in Europe or wherever, these people, their capability and their general acumen, it would be incredibly unfair and just wrong, plain wrong, to tarnish them with some notion that, well, government generally isn't that great, so they're not going to be very good, and so maybe this Donald Trump approach isn't no, but that's what we're talking about, right? Maybe this negotiating strategy Donald Trump, is maybe we should give that a try, as opposed to.
Well, it's too late for that. All right, let's be very clear. It's too late for this kind of thinking. He is the president,
but it's a respect. That's the thing. It's a respect for. And not just admission. Well, Biden couldn't figure it out, so they mustn't know. They mustn't know.
Trump's got his own panel of people doing this, all right?
Yeah, you know who they are. They're nut jobs, and they don't know what they're doing.
Well, I'm just saying. Let's we'll see.
Do they have a CanStar award for quality of? There's the 5-star version that we currently have, and then there's the Donald Trump circus version. So
well, I'll wait for the mooch to weigh in to kind of shore us up. Let's revisit.
What was the other things that we wanted to change? You wanted to change something about
kids. Well, obviously, my wanting to change you to be a bit more open to a bit of mistrust in institutions is not going well. But I just think that you have, and I've spoken to you about this before, Andy, you've got this idea of this real systems thinking where you don't believe that any one individual or kind of entity is trying to manufacture certain outcomes, and most things are just emergent order and just the system kind of, and all conspiracy theorists ever do is try to find misattribute patterns, right, where they're not there. And I just again, I think that there are bad actors. I think that certain bad actors can overcome a system.
So wait, hang on. Sorry, does this relate to having more kids?
No, this was my one around you're trying to get me to trust institutions more, and I'm trying to get you to kind of trust them less. But
I think I have a healthy level of distrust. One of the things that where you can go wrong is when you watch the news, you got those talking head sort of folk who get up and start telling you about everything that's going to happen, and this thing's going to happen, and that's going to happen. You don't listen to those people, so they're not those talking head people, like they're charlatans, right? But I guess what I'm more referring to in this space is the collective, like like when they do forecasting, right? One common approach to forecasting is actually consensus forecasts. So you for whatever a variable is, whatever it might be, you take 20 forecasters and you take the consensus forecast and which is like the average of the 20, and it's not necessarily going to be, well, it won't be, it sort of almost by definition won't be correct. But like if you take that approach, all the time, you'll probably have fewer errors than you would if you just thought that like you just had some wisdom to like pick out everything. So it's that principle, but like extended to the institutions that kind of do that in a more elegant way than simply averaging the numbers. All right, let's pivot to the future. What could you see yourself changing your views on?
All right, let me get one thing out of the way. There are signs, and how Trump spoke about Zelensky is definitely one of them, and I have condemned that on air about him being a dictator and all that stuff. That definitely could be, your wish could come true around the corner, where I'm a lot more vocally in opposition to things with Trump, and that could be how he treats certain things. But I think that I see myself in terms of changing. Right now, most people have this general hierarchy of effort and reward. And I actually think that is going to really break down a lot in the coming 10, 15 years in societies all across the world, mainly due to automation through AI and other things like that. This is going to be a wave of AI that we're seeing now, and then it's going to quickly move into agents that are doing things, not just telling you things. And then there's going to be robotics. And I just think that our view of society, of like who is successful, who is actually contributing, and what it means to have like a career is going to fundamentally change. And I can see I really can see the roots of that changing my mind around things of, well, what should we fill our time with, and what is actually useful? Like, does it collapse into the home family again? Does it become like everyone's on some kind of welfare and we're doing things that enrich each other's society? Like, I don't know. And so I can definitely see this hanging over this next stage. Like, I can feel these big changes coming. And the other is this idea of something that we spoke about a long, long time ago, and it's veganism. I think that it's almost sacrilegious to say that in a period where Trump and the right are kind of ascending to power all over the globe. But I do think that this is a blind spot for society, and that we'll, like our kids or our kids' will look back and they'll kind of think, hey, people were pretty bad. People were pretty careless. And I kind of feel like that is something that I'm not sure will kind of come in, will catch the end for us, but I think maybe it might. So those are my two.
Just to that last point, I kind of think that it'll be far enough in the future such that people who might look back at that, it's almost a bit like looking back at ancient cultures.
You
like,
think it'll be that far?
Uncouth things. Yeah, like so I think we're safe on that front. I guess like the irony of like this whole question of, what's something that you might change your mind about? Like, the irony is that if you're raising it now as something you might change your mind about, you're probably already on the journey of doing so. I hope to God that you don't change your mind about Trump, because I think...
Well, he doesn't have a third term.
I think if you do change your mind about Trump, I think that means we're in deep shit. So I actually really do hope that you can tell me in 4 years' time, see, you're such a pussy, like, see how much fun we had in the last 4 years. But
I like
I'm going to do my
steak.
two.
Some people like spaghetti. That's why they have menus.
My first one, I'm going to say the whole woke stuff, right? So I've followed the journey of like being kind of a little bit anti-woke, right? Because I just see it as like, a mixture of virtue signaling. Like I'm skeptical of anyone who like picks up woke kind of themes and sort of language and takes it forward like it's a bit of an elitist thing. It's like, hey, we're better, we're just better than you, so that's why we have this new code that only we understand, and you're not quite good enough to understand it. So it's just got that sort of vibe to it, right? And just generally, it doesn't make sense. Like it's so much of it's like identity politics. It's cultural. It's a lot of it's meaningless, and it's just pushing the envelope for the sake of it. So not because there's actual genuine people
progress
in
for the
need.
point of progress.
So anyway, so I'm a bit anti-woke, right? And I think that for anyone who's been listening, I think that should be relatively clear. But what I would say is that I think these things are always about undershooting, overshooting. So I think woke, peak woke, we probably are, we're definitely post peak woke now because we've got Donald Trump. But like to the extent that...
Could be just licking their wounds and working on how to come back stronger.
Well, I just wonder if I'm going to at some point pivot because like, you know, I'm quite outraged about most of what Donald Trump, or pretty much everything he's done. And will I get to a point where I'll start defending sort of woke values, like because it's gone too far in the other direction? So, and maybe just to sort of maybe reassess my view on it, just to say, well, yeah, it was actually a weapon. Like, so the whole woke agenda type line was it's now being weaponized. Like it started off being like a legitimate question to ask, but now it's very much a political tool. So will I reassess the kinds of stuff I was exposed to go, well, actually, this really wasn't like actually happening like en masse. This was just like the very worst, most extreme examples. And I just happened to be consuming media and content that always talked about it. So I had this perception of like the world being one way, but it actually wasn't really like that. So I guess that's where I'd go with the woke stuff.
Can I ask you something? We've recorded. No, we definitely haven't done our Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 Hours yet. We've done over 100 episodes together. Do you think, you know, we have a segment here where we said we wish we could change a view on each other. Do you think that I have changed your view on anything and you have changed my view on anything after 100 episodes?
I don't think you've necessarily... I can't think of a specific thing that you've changed, like where I thought one thing and I've changed my view to something else. That's not to say you haven't, but I just can't think of a specific example. But I definitely think that the conversations are thought-provoking and there's stuff that you've said that has formed my own thinking on something, right? So it's not... I don't know if it's... I can't think of, as I said, like a specific example of, I did think that, now I think something different. But like I definitely...
have had realizations like as you've been...
Well, the act of talking about it, right? Like gives you sort of a process of understanding, right?
It's funny though, isn't it? It's like, can you really change someone's mind, right? And the answer is really no. There can be certain facts that you hear and you accept, right? Maybe, but you don't really change people's mind, right? You have to do it yourself. Like you have to go through the process of doing it yourself, right? And depending on who you are, there's different levels of how much internally that has to come from you versus you let it come from a trusted source, right? Like I think that I was trying to think, okay, well, as I was saying that, what would I say? And I think actually maybe our discussion on like racism and white privilege, maybe, you know, it's not like something that you said, I'm like, oh yeah, Andy's right. But it's more like that discussion changed my view on the topic, right? Like I have changed my view on the usefulness of focusing on that topic and what it does to like the actual humans involved in that interchange and the exchange of ideas, right? And as a result of that, it's also altered my view on like not holding this worldview of everything gets better if you discuss it more and more and more. Like that's actually not my worldview anymore. You know, there are some things that are worth talking about and there's some things that aren't. You know, there's some things that are sparring about that are inconsequential and other things that actually cause actual harm in the world. So I would kind of probably point to a topic like that. Yeah.
Well, you know what they say. There's two things you shouldn't talk about at the kitchen table. You know,
so religion and politics.
Religion and politics. But I think a nice bookend to tonight's conversation is, and sort of riffing on that religion and politics theme, is to say the other thing that I could potentially change my mind on, and I want to be really clear about what I actually mean when I say religion. But I definitely probably have changed my mind on religion quite a lot in the last 5-10 years. I used to be quite like, not like hardcore atheist, but like definitely atheist. Like I would definitely have that proudly in
your pronouns.
But I think I probably have a lot more respect for religion itself now. So like, and I sort of now wonder, all we hear about is the horrors of religion. So we hear about the, like sexual abuse in, institutional abuse and all that sort of stuff. And, you hear about like conflicts and, wars and stuff like that. So there's a lot of negative stuff to religion. So I don't want to kind of, like wallpaper over that. But at the same time, I do wonder, like, in the actual day-to-day of like modern people's lives, are we actually better off having ditched religion in the way that we have en masse? Or is there something that would be better about our lives today if we were, let's say, still like, I could say like a Christian nation, in the sense that like that's the, where people actually went to church and they actually believed this stuff. And then I guess to then extend that, like, what might change in the future, because I'm still skeptical of all of that. But like, I just wonder, like, could I ever at some point like become religious again? Could that happen?
The answer is, sorry to, trim the road not traveled, but the answer is no, Andy, because you can't force yourself to believe. You can't, and you can act and you can have an admiration and appreciation of the values and see the positive like aspects of it. But at the end of the day, you can't force yourself to believe and have faith.
But I think that's the wrong question for me. Like,
it's
I
the
think
only question when it comes to religion.
No. I think
It's
because
the
I've
tenet.
seen but like I think that's like a superficial view of religion. Like, I think that's focusing, and the to use the fairies at the bottom of the garden analogy, like that's focusing on the supernatural element of it, right? And I think nowadays modern religious organizations are, and this is maybe the difference, like if you synthesize religion down to like, do you believe in the supernatural elements of either, the stuff that, if you're a Christian, Jesus and all that stuff and all the things that happen there, or do you, or God in some kind of abstract sense, like a not very sophisticated kind of take on religion would focus on that supernatural side of it. But I think a more sophisticated approach, and I think more and more religious organizations are trying to do this, broaden it to this, God is whatever God means to you, right? And it can almost be a little bit like, like Buddhism. Like, it can be this, like, almost like a meditation. So it's a more inclusive space where you can still engage with it without necessarily that being the same, like conjuring up the same notion of belief as what you've just spoken to. So, because there's no way I'm ever going to believe in like I'm too far gone to start believing.
Well, that's why you'd be going to hell.
You've said a line before. I think you've said it on the podcast. You imagine the most darkest fantasy anyone has, and there'll be some porn for that, right?
Yeah, I do say that a lot.
Yeah, I think the same is for religion.
Well,
right?
I mean, you only have to look at the floats in Mardi Gras, which is coming up, that there is a sect for every single religion out there.
Yeah,
but
like there's a place for so I don't think I can't imagine a world where I would start believing in supernatural stuff again. But
even the fact that you're calling it supernatural, Andy, like this stuff, there's only one thing that you need to do to be accepted into the kingdom of God, and that is to truly believe in your heart that He is your Savior and He died for you.
Yeah, but you're talking about your very specific religion that you grew up with. I'm not talking about your church and your experience with religion. I'm talking about what religion could be and what it might evolve to be. And I'm not even necessarily talking about Christianity. I'm just talking in the more abstract sense of what, like, because at the end of the day, what is God, right? God is just what's beyond everything we can see, right? I mean, you could even join like an Elon Musk cult and say, well, we're in a simulation, so all hail the creator of the simulation. That's our God, right? Like, you
then
can.
Why use the word religion then?
Well, because I think what I would be appealed and
the whole.
No, because I think what I'd be attracted to are the positive. Well, what are the things that I can glean from the, whatever it might be, whether it's a group of people coming together discussing what's a good way to live. If you're talking about it in the context of like Christianity and you're saying, well, all right, well, what's the, is the Bible is that a good way to live your life? I would probably...
I think they do have effective altruism groups in Sydney.
Yeah, and I'm not saying, like, remember what this segment is. It's like things that you might change your mind on in the future. So I'm not necessarily here to defend it, but like, and to say, yeah, that's totally what's going to happen. But like, I don't know, there's some part of me that sees it, like, especially when you're trying to find meaning, like, is there some way to like have your cake and eat it too, where you can get the benefits without, you know, also having to believe in fairies?
No, I mean, look, I've often thought about that, and it's just hard to grow new shoots like on the branches if you don't have the trunk anymore, and the trunk is faith.
But what if your faith isn't in the supernatural? What if your faith is in the beliefs? What if your faith is in the beliefs that, well, for better or worse, this way of living has been very effective and it's evolved over time? What if your faith isn't at all? It's in the system of values, like, because I think that's kind of more what I'm talking about, and I think that's more grey. I can imagine a world where you can just sort of say, well, look, all this stuff was like developed like thousands of years ago, where people didn't really have any conception of science or anything like that. So of course they like made up crazy stories, but like these values are the right values, and like we're going to continue to, like, we believe in these values, and that's what we're taking forward. Like, I'm sure there's a church that peddles that stuff. So I just got to find that one.
Make your own. Become a cult leader. Probably what Trump's doing. Anyway, I think we probably should wrap it here. I think that the real key will be with the whole Trump thing. Like, what do you think our children will think of him? Like, what will history actually say, right? Like, and I think that would be the real key thing, right? Like,
the irony to that question, the other day, my son came out running, all excited, saying, "Dad, I finally know why you don't like Donald Trump. Oh, it's so crazy. How long has he been president for? And he's already done," and he just rattled off this like perfect list of like all the terrible things he's done. It was just like, it's like, was he like crazy? And then I showed him videos of Elon Musk, and then I showed him the one with the AI generated Gaza, you know, the one with the, it's like, what? Yeah, so these kids are
they're catching on.
They're catching on.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm gathering you didn't buy any Trump or Melania meme coins then.
I'm saving up for my first condo in Gaza.
Very good. Why would you want to come back?
See you next week.